Explain a couple of things, because I understand that the basic ideas here are very different from what we are accustomed to, right? So there's kind of an underlying thesis, you might call it, which is that most of us are not aware of what we're doing. We are not aware of what we're doing. We're even less aware of how we do what we do. Okay? How I walk, or how is it that I count, right? How is it that I remember, or how is it that I forget? Right? So these most basic, how do I digest food? These most basic functions I'm not aware of. Now, to a large extent, that's a good thing, because to have to be constantly aware, it would slow me down, right? We can all understand that if each moment I'm having to pay attention to everything going on, it would be very encumbering, and there would be no room for me to think. But, so that's fine. That's fine if everything is good. Okay? But when I have difficulty, whether that difficulty is emotional, psychological, physical, I'll try to explain later, we don't really make a distinction in those things. It's not that we can't make the linguistic distinction, say, of course, there's emotions and there's movement we for the purpose of discussion. But at a very fundamental level, Feldenkrais's position was, and still would be today, that feeling myself in terms of reporting to you, I'm feeling love, or feeling myself, I'm reaching with my left arm, those two acts are identical. That in order to know what I'm feeling emotionally, I need to turn my attention inward. And what I feel is the way that my musculature and my viscera are organized. In other words, that there's a relationship between tonus, right, muscular activity, and emotion or mood, right? Or I'd even write it this way: tonus equals emotion or mood. Okay? So that when I report to you what I'm feeling, I'm turning my attention toward myself. All right. And so some people we know can report with great detail and almost in a poetic way, make distinctions about their feelings, right? And in terms of movement, what Dr. Feldenkrais would say is, in order to do what you want to do, you need to know what you're doing. In order to do what you want, you need to know what you're doing. And in order to know what you're doing, you need to feel yourself. In other words, how do you know? You can't know yourself in the abstract sense. You need to feel yourself. So then, the problem is, how do you create the conditions that allows us to be able to sense and feel ourselves? Does that make sense? How do you create the conditions in which we can feel ourselves? We can make the sensory distinctions. This is a very important idea. The sensory distinctions to do what we want to do. Right? Now, so what Feldenkrais understood was that was the fundamental thing, that our brain is acting in our behalf. Our brain wants us to have a pleasurable, easy life. But over time, we form certain habits which, for many people, are making them unhappy one way or another, or feeling unrealized or unfulfilled one way or another, right? Or if only, right? And that's, as a culture, we have a very kind of, small or local way of thinking. Well, if my parents were different, or only if I could stop doing this, or, for me, only if I could eat less, or only if I would exercise. We think that if there's one thing that's missing, and if that thing was corrected, right? That's like this cerebral palsy fellow I was telling you about, and many cerebral palsy children that I've worked with. They have trouble with this, lots of muscular contraction, and then they end up banging their knees together. I'm sure you've seen people walking like that. Right? So what does the doctor want to do? He said, well, we're going to cut your tendons. Right? We'll cut the tendons that are pulling the knees in or the feet in. We're going to cut them. We're going to shorten or they're walking on their toes, right? They're walking on their toes. We're going to cut the Achilles tendon, and then the heel will be lower, right? But what happens? If you've known anybody like that, you know that they cut them, and then 90% of them, what? In a few months, they're back to the way they were walking before, because there's been no change in the brain. The muscles have nothing to do with anything. The muscles are only doing what your brain is telling them to do. Muscles have no intelligence. Muscles have no memory. So, muscles have no innate intelligence. Jumping isn't learned by the muscles. It's our brain that learns how to jump, how to move, how to walk in a way that makes back pain, how to walk in a way that hurts my neck by the time, gives me all sorts of tingling sensations down the arm or down the leg. So, back to what I was saying. So Feldenkrais said, okay, so the fundamental issue is to create an environment, create the conditions for people to feel themselves. And he understood something just brilliantly, which is that there's an inverse relationship between effort and our ability to feel. In other words, that muscular effort creates noise. Muscular effort creates noise that makes it more difficult for us to make distinctions, to feel ourselves. So I'll show you. And it's all of our senses work that way. So there's a theorem that goes with this, but this is all scientific fact. Let's say that we have these lights in this room, okay? And I'm going to ask you to tell me, I can manipulate the lights. There's more lights that haven't been turned on. And I'm going to ask you to tell me when the room gets brighter. Okay? And I turn on, let's say there's 100 light bulbs on. And I tell you, you tell me when the room gets brighter. And I turn on one light bulb, I turn on two, I turn on three. Nobody says anything. Looks the same. And then finally I turn on a 10th light bulb, and almost all of you say, hey, the room got brighter. Now we do the same exercise, but we only have 10 light bulbs on. Okay? How many light bulbs do I need to turn? How many light bulbs do I need to turn on for you to see a difference? only 1. Because the way our senses work, the ratio between let's call it a stimulus, like light or sound, the ratio between a sound and our ability to notice a difference in that sound remains constant. Now, I don't want to make it difficult because it's actually easy. If I'm holding, let's say the same ratio, it's not really the same, but let's say I'm holding a 100-pound bag, right? And I'm holding that 100-pound bag. It takes a lot of effort to hold that 100 pounds, right? And you keep putting extra things on it, but I'm blindfolded, so I don't know what you're doing. It's not till you add 10 pounds that I would say, hey, it's different. This is not a literal example because the ratio is different, but I'm just trying to make it easy for you. But if I'm only holding 10 pounds, then you only have to put 1 pound on before I say, oh, it got heavier. So my ability to feel a difference is dependent on the intensity of the work I'm doing. Does that make sense? Well, now, wow, what if I'm only holding 1 pound? Then when do I notice a difference? When you only, that's right, when you only add 1/10 of a pound. So what happened? You would say, oh, look how sensitive he is. He could feel the difference at 1/10 of a pound now. But if I'm only holding 1/10 of a pound, right? Then all I need is 100th to feel the difference. In other words, the more you reduce the intensity of the work or the stimulus, the more sensitive I become to differences. Okay? In order to do what I want, I need to know what I'm doing. In order to know what I'm doing, I need to be able to feel myself. All right? Okay? Yeah, I understand that these are different ideas, they're novel ideas, but you'll find that once you understand, you see that everything else that we do is crude, because we're bypassing all the advantages that we can get from using our brain to make the change. Okay? I'm not saying I don't go to the gym. I'm not saying that I don't do exercise. This is something different.